Picture this, it's 70 Nix and you're standing in the shadowed halls of Christiansborg Palace in Copenhagen. The air is thick with whispers, the kind that make your skin crawl. A young king, barely 17, stumbles past you, his eyes wild, muttering to himself as if possessed. Servants avert their gazes, but you hear the forbidden truth they dare not speak. Christian VII of Denmark, ruler of an empire, is unravelling, consumed by a compulsion so shameful it's erased from history books. His obsession isn't power or conquest. It's something far darker, more primal, a secret that threatens to topple a dynasty. You weren't meant to know this, but tonight, I'm pulling you into the abyss. This is the story of a king who couldn't stop, a tale of hidden agendas, psychological chains, and a truth so dangerous it was buried for centuries. If you're ready to face what's been suppressed, stay with me. This knowledge will change you forever. Christian VII wasn't born to be a monster. He was a boy, bright and sensitive, thrust into a world that demanded perfection. His father, Frederick V, was a drunkard who ruled Denmark with a trembling hand, leaving a legacy of instability. From the moment Christian could walk, he was moulded to be the opposite, a symbol of divine order, a king to restore glory to a faltering empire. But the court was a viper's nest, filled with nobles who saw the young prince as a pawn. Tutors beat him for daydreaming, courtiers mocked his stammer, and his mother, Queen Louise, suffocated him with expectations. By age 10, he was reciting Latin scriptures flawlessly, but crying himself to sleep, haunted by a gnawing sense of inadequacy. This wasn't just a boy being raised, it was a soul being forged in a crucible of control. What no one expected was the fracture that began to show. At 14, Christian started retreating into himself, spending hours alone in his chambers. Servants whispered of strange noises, frantic, rhythmic, shameful. The court physician, a man named Reverdal, was summoned in secret. His diagnosis was vague but damning, an unnatural fixation of the mind and body. The truth? Christian was consumed by masturbation, an act so taboo in 18th century Europe that it was branded a sin, a disease, a threat to the soul and state. Doctors claimed it weakened the body, clouded the mind, and invited demonic possession. For a king whose body was seen as the embodiment of the nation, this was catastrophic. But this wasn't just about a boy's urges, it was about a system designed to break him. The court didn't want to cure Christian, they wanted to control him. Advisors like Count Ditlev Reventlow saw opportunity in his weakness. They fed him pamphlets warning of the solitary vice, claiming it would drive him mad, unfit to rule. These weren't medical texts, they were weapons of psychological warfare, crafted to keep the young king docile. Reventlow and his allies knew a weak monarch meant power for them. They orchestrated a campaign of shame, ensuring Christian's every move was watched, his every moment scrutinized. Chambermaids reported his habits. Priests preached sermons on purity in his presence. He was trapped in a panopticon of guilt, his own body turned against him. This was no accident. It was institutional manipulation at its cruelest. But Christian fought back in the only way he could: defiance. At 16, he was crowned king, and for a fleeting moment, he seemed to rise above it all. He married Caroline Matilda, a 15-year-old English princess, hoping love would anchor him. Their wedding was a spectacle, golden carriages, cheering crowds, a facade of divine union. But behind closed doors, Christian was spiralling. The pressure to produce an heir, combined with the court's relentless surveillance, pushed him deeper into his compulsion. He'd lock himself in his chambers for days, emerging pale and trembling, his eyes hollow. Caroline, young and isolated, didn't understand. She wrote letters to her brother, King George III, hinting at her husband's peculiar habits, but never daring to name them. The truth was unspeakable. This wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a political powder keg. Denmark was a key player in Europe's balance of power, with colonies in the Caribbean and trade routes to India. A mad king could destabilize alliances, invite invasion, or worse, spark rebellion. The court knew this, and they tightened their grip. They brought in Johann Friedrich Struensee, a German doctor, to fix Christian. Struensee was no ordinary physician. He was a radical, an Enlightenment thinker who believed in reason over superstition. He saw Christian not as a sinner, but as a victim of a repressive system. For a moment, it seemed like salvation. Struensee gained the king's trust, encouraging him to embrace his humanity, to see his urges as natural, not demonic. But this was dangerous knowledge, truths that threatened the very foundations of the court's power. Struensee's influence grew, and so did the backlash. Nobles whispered he was a sorcerer corrupting the king's soul. They weren't wrong to fear him. Struensee wasn't just healing Christian, he was awakening him. He introduced reforms, bashing noble privileges and freeing serfs, moves that made him enemies at every turn. But his biggest mistake was underestimating the court's ruthlessness. They didn't just want Christian weak, they wanted him broken. And they had a plan. They began spreading rumours that Christian's vice was a sign of divine judgment, that his madness was proof he was unfit to rule. The goal wasn't to dethrone him, but to make him a puppet, a king in name only, while they pulled the strings. By 1770, Christian was a ghost of himself. He'd pace the palace at night, muttering about devils and divine punishment. His compulsion had become a ritual, a desperate attempt to feel something, anything in a world that had stripped him of agency. Struensee tried to shield him, but the court was closing in. They had spies everywhere, even in the Queen's bedchamber. Caroline, now 19 and desperate for affection, had grown close to Struensee. Their affair was inevitable, a spark in a tinderbox. When it was discovered, the court pounced. They accused Struensee of treason, claiming he'd bewitched the king and seduced the Queen to seize power. It was a lie, but a brilliant one. Truth didn't matter when fear and shame ruled. Christian's world collapsed. Struensee was arrested, tortured and executed in 1772, his body torn apart before a jeering crowd. Caroline was exiled, her infant daughter taken from her. And Christian? He was left alone, a broken man at 23, his mind shattered by guilt and betrayal. The court had won. They installed their own regents, men like Reventlow, to rule in Christian's name. He became a figurehead, paraded at ceremonies but locked away when his episode struck. His compulsion worsened, a silent scream against a world that had caged him. This wasn't just a king's downfall, it was a masterclass in psychological control, a warning of what happens when power turns a man into a prisoner of his own mind. You're starting to see it now, aren't you? This isn't just history, it's a mirror. Christian's story was buried because it exposes the truth. Power doesn't just corrupt, it devours. The court didn't need swords or poison, they used shame, fear and secrecy to break a king, and they're still doing it today. Look around. What truths are you told to fear? What parts of yourself are you taught to hide? This knowledge is dangerous because it wakes you up. It shows you the chains you didn't know you were wearing. If you're feeling that pull, that unease, you're already halfway down the rabbit hole. Stay with me, we're going deeper. You're in too deep now to turn back. The shadows of Christiansborg Palace are closing in, and the air feels heavier, like the weight of secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. Christian VII's story isn't just about a king who couldn't stop. It's about a world built on control, where truth is a weapon and shame is a chain. You're starting to see the pattern, aren't you? The court didn't just break a man, they broke a mind, a soul and an empire, all to protect their own power. This is the second layer of the abyss, where we uncover the hidden machinery of manipulation, the ancient corruption that turned a king into a puppet. Brace yourself. This truth cuts deeper, and once you see it, there's no unseeing it. Christian's descent wasn't random, it was engineered. The court knew a fractured king was easier to control than a strong one, so they turned his own body into a battlefield. By 1770, at just 21 years old, Christian was a walking paradox, a monarch with absolute power yet powerless over himself. His compulsion, masturbation, the solitary vice that obsessed 18th century Europe, wasn't just a personal failing, it was a cultural obsession, a lightning rod for fear. The church called it a sin against God. Doctors labelled it a disease that drained vitality. Pamphlets circulated, warning that it caused insanity, blindness, even death. For a king whose health was tied to the nation's prosperity, this was more than scandal. It was treason against the divine order. But let's peel back the lie. This wasn't about morality, it was about power. The court's inner circle, led by men like Count Ditlev Reventlow, saw Christian's weakness as their opportunity. They didn't want to cure him, they wanted to weaponize his shame. They hired physicians to monitor him, not to heal, but to report. Every locked door, every late-night episode was catalogued and whispered to the right ears. They fed him treatises on the dangers of his vice, written by quacks who claimed it would rot his brain. These weren't medical diagnoses, they were scripts, designed to make Christian doubt his own sanity. The more he believed he was broken, the more he surrendered control. This was psychological warfare, perfected centuries ago. The court turned Christian's private moments into public spectacle, not by exposing him, but by letting him know he was watched. Servants were bribed to spy, their loyalty bought with coin and fear. Priests delivered sermons tailored to his guilt, preaching about the sins of the flesh while staring him down. Even his closest advisors played the game, offering sympathy in public but plotting in private. They created a prison without walls, where every glance, every whisper, reminded Christian he was defective. This wasn't just about controlling a king, it was about controlling the idea of a king. A divine ruler couldn't be flawed, so they made his flaws the centre of his existence. And Christian felt it. He was no fool, at least not yet. He wrote letters in his youth, sharp and witty, showing a mind that could have rivaled Europe's greatest. But by his early 20s, those letters turned frantic, scrawled with apologies for sins he couldn't name. He'd pace the palace at night, muttering about judgment, convinced God and Denmark had turned against him. His compulsion became his only escape, a fleeting release from a world that crushed him. But every time he gave in, the guilt deepened, a cycle engineered to keep him trapped. This wasn't addiction, it was enslavement. A man chained to his own desires by those who stood to gain. Enter Johann Friedrich Struensee, the one man who saw through the lie. Struensee wasn't just a doctor, he was a revolutionary, a disciple of Voltaire and Rousseau. He believed in reason, not superstition, and he saw Christian's torment for what it was, a manufactured crisis. When he arrived at court in 1769, he shocked everyone by treating the king like a human, not a symbol. He listened to Christian's fears, read his letters, and told him the truth. His urges weren't evil, just natural. For the first time, someone offered Christian freedom, not from his compulsion, but from the shame that bound it. Struensee became more than a physician. He was a mentor, a friend, the only one who dared to defy the court script. But freedom is dangerous in a world built on control. Struensee didn't stop at healing Christian. He used his influence to reshape Denmark. He abolished torture, freed serfs, and curbed the nobles' power. These were radical moves, Enlightenment ideals that threatened the old guard. The court watched, seething, as this outsider turned their puppet king into a reformer. Christian, for a brief moment, seemed to wake up. He signed Struensee's decrees, attended council meetings, even laughed again. But the nobles weren't idle. They saw Struensee's rise as a direct threat, not just to their wealth, but to the system of fear and control they'd perfected over centuries. The court's counterattack was brutal. They didn't need evidence, they had rumours. They spread whispers that Struensee was a heretic, a libertine who had corrupted the king's soul. They pointed to his reforms as proof of treason, claiming he was dismantling Denmark's divine order. But their masterstroke was targeting Christian's wife, Queen Caroline Matilda. She was 19, lonely, and trapped in a marriage with a king who could barely look at her. Struensee, with his charm and compassion, filled that void. Their affair was real, but it was also a trap. The court let it fester, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When they did, it was with surgical precision. In 1771, spies caught Struensee and Caroline in a compromising moment. The court pounced, accusing them of adultery and treason. They claimed Struensee had bewitched Christian, using his radical ideas to control the king's mind. It was a lie, but it played on Europe's deepest fears. A foreign doctor, defying God and crown, seducing a queen to seize power. Christian, already fragile, was bombarded with accusations. His advisors told him Struensee had betrayed him, that Caroline had mocked him, that his own desires had invited this chaos. He broke. In a single night, he signed the order for Struensee's arrest, not because he believed the lies, but because he couldn't trust himself anymore. Struensee's trial was a sham. He was tortured, his confessions twisted to fit the narrative. On April 28, 1772, he was executed in Copenhagen's public square, his body hacked apart as a warning. Caroline was banished to a remote castle, her daughter ripped from her arms. Christian didn't attend the execution. He was locked in his chambers, sobbing, his compulsion now a desperate ritual to drown out the screams in his head. The court had won, but at a cost. Denmark's reforms were undone, the nobles' power restored. Christian was a shell, a king in name only, his every move dictated by the men who'd turned his shame into a leash. This is where you pause and feel it, the weight of a truth that's been hidden for centuries. Christian's story isn't just about a king, it's about you. The same forces that broke him are still at work. Systems that shame you into submission, that turn your desires against you, that make you question your own mind. Right now, I need you to lock this in. Go to the comments and type "break the chains" twice. It's not just for the algorithm, it's a signal to yourself, a step toward waking up. You're not just watching a video, you're claiming a truth they didn't want you to know. Do it now and let's keep descending. You're standing at the edge of a precipice now, staring into the void of a truth so raw it burns. Christian VII's story isn't just a tragedy, it's a blueprint, a map of how power twists the human spirit into knots. The court didn't just break a king, they broke the very idea of freedom, turning a man's own mind against him. You've seen the machinery of shame, the weaponized whispers, the spies in every shadow. Now we go deeper into the heart of the conspiracy that devoured a kingdom. This is where the veil lifts, where you see the ancient corruption that thrives in silence, the kind that still shapes the world you live in. You're not just hearing history, you're uncovering a truth that changes how you see yourself. Stay with me. This is the point of no return. By 1771, Christian VII was a shadow of a king, his mind a battlefield of guilt and defiance. At 22, he should have been at the height of his power, ruling Denmark and Norway with the vigour of youth. Instead, he was a prisoner in his own palace, his compulsion a chain forged by the court's relentless campaign. They'd turned his private struggle into a public weapon, whispering that his vice was proof of divine wrath, a sign he was unfit to wear the crown. But this wasn't about his body, it was about his will. The nobles, led by men like Count Ditlev Reventlow, didn't want a king who could think for himself. They wanted a marionette, and that they were pulling the strings tighter every day. Johann Friedrich Struensee was their greatest threat. This German doctor with his Enlightenment ideals wasn't just healing Christian, he was waking him up. Struensee saw through the court's game, knew their moral outrage was a facade, a tool to keep the king docile. He spent hours with Christian, not just as a physician but as a confidant, reading the king's frantic letters, listening to his fears. He told Christian the truth. His urges weren't demonic, just human. For the first time, Christian felt seen, not judged. It was a spark of rebellion, a glimpse of what he could have been, a king who ruled, not a pawn who obeyed. Struensee's influence spread like wildfire. He didn't stop at the king's chambers, he took on the entire system. In less than 2 years, he pushed through over 1,000 reforms, abolishing serfdom, banning torture, even curbing the church's grip on education. These weren't just laws, they were a direct assault on the nobles' power. Denmark's elite, who'd grown fat on privilege, saw their world unravelling. Struensee was no saint. He was ambitious, maybe even reckless, but he believed in a better world, one where reason trumped superstition. And Christian, for a fleeting moment, believed it too. He signed every decree, his signature shaky but resolute, as if he could rewrite his own fate. But the court was watching, and they were patient. They knew Struensee's rise was tied to Christian's trust, and to Queen Caroline Matilda. The young queen, only 20, was trapped in a loveless marriage with a king who could barely speak to her. Struensee, with his charm and intellect, became her refuge. Their affair was more than scandal. It was a rebellion against the suffocating order of the court. Caroline wasn't just a lonely wife. She was a woman awakening to her own power, inspired by Struensee's vision. Together, they were a threat the nobles couldn't ignore, a king and queen who might actually rule, guided by a man who dared to defy the old ways. The court's response was a masterclass in manipulation. They didn't attack Struensee directly. They used Christian's fragility against him. They flooded the palace with rumours, claiming Struensee was a sorcerer, a foreign agent plotting to seize the throne. They leaned on the era's paranoia, painting his reforms as heretical, his influence as witchcraft. But their real weapon was the affair. Spies caught glimpses of Caroline and Struensee together, stolen moments in the Queen's chambers, a brush of hands in a corridor. The nobles didn't expose it immediately. They waited, letting the evidence pile up like kindling. They knew Christian's jealousy, his insecurity, could be turned into a blade. In January 1772, they struck. At a masked ball in Christiansborg, the court staged their coup. Guards burst into Struensee's quarters, dragging him away in chains. Caroline was seized from her bed, her screams echoing through the palace. The charges were treason and adultery, backed by forged letters and coerced confessions from terrified servants. Christian, already teetering on the edge of sanity, was cornered by his advisors. They showed him proof of the affair, letters he couldn't verify, whispers he couldn't refute. They told him Struensee had manipulated him, that Caroline had betrayed him, that his own weakness had invited this chaos. In a haze of guilt and rage, Christian signed the arrest warrants, his hand trembling so violently he could barely hold the quill. Struensee's trial was a farce, a public ritual to restore the old order. He was tortured for weeks, his body broken to extract confessions that were half-truths at best. The court didn't need evidence, they needed a spectacle. On April 28, 1772, Struensee was executed in Copenhagen's public square. His head struck off, his body quartered before a roaring crowd. Caroline was spared death but exiled to a remote castle in Chell, her infant daughter torn from her arms. She was 21, alone, and branded a traitor. The nobles spun the story masterfully. Struensee was the villain, Caroline the seductress, and Christian the tragic king, too weak to resist their influence. Christian was left shattered. The court had stripped him of his only allies, Struensee, who'd given him hope, and Caroline, who'd offered love. He retreated deeper into his compulsion, locking himself in his chambers for days, his body a battleground of shame and defiance. The nobles installed their own regent, Christian's stepmother Juliane Marie, to rule in his name. She was a puppet of the old guard, reversing Struensee's reforms and restoring the nobles' privileges. Christian became a ghost, paraded at state functions but hidden when his episode struck. His letters from this time are heartbreaking, rambling pleas for forgiveness, addressed to no one, as if he could atone for a sin he didn't fully understand. This wasn't just a coup, it was a psychological assassination. The court didn't kill Christian's body. They killed his will, his identity, his ability to resist. They used his own desires, his own fears to make him complicit in his downfall. This is the truth they buried. Power doesn't need violence when it has shame. The nobles didn't just control Christian, they controlled the narrative, erasing Struensee's reforms and Caroline's courage from history. They turned a king into a cautionary tale, a warning to anyone who dared to challenge the system, and they're still doing it. Look at the world around you. What desires are you taught to fear? What truths are you told to bury? The chains aren't always visible, but they're there. You're awake now, aren't you? You can feel the weight of it, the way this story mirrors your own life. The systems that shame you, the voices that tell you you're not enough, they're not new. They're as old as Christian's palace, as calculated as the nobles' whispers. I need you to lock this in again. Go to the comments and type "break the chains" twice. It's a signal, a declaration that you see through the lies. You're not just a viewer, you're a man claiming his power, stepping into the truth. Do it now, and let's plunge deeper into the abyss. You're deep in the abyss now, where the light of truth casts shadows that chill the soul. Christian VII's story isn't just a tale of a broken king, it's a revelation of how power thrives on silence, how it twists the human spirit to protect itself. The court didn't just destroy a man, they rewrote reality, erasing his allies, his will and his legacy. You've seen the machinery of shame, the coup that crushed a revolution, the lies that turned a king into a puppet. Now we descend further, into the aftermath of betrayal, where the true cost of this conspiracy comes into focus. This is the forbidden history they didn't want you to know, a truth that exposes the roots of control that still bind us today. You're not just listening, you're awakening. Hold fast, this gets darker. After Struensee's execution in 1772, Christian VII was a husk, a king in name only. At 23, he should have been leading Denmark into a new era, but instead, he was a prisoner of his own mind, locked in a cycle of guilt and compulsion. The court had won, stripping him of Struensee's reason and Caroline's love. They installed Juliane Marie, Christian's stepmother, and her son Frederick as regents to rule in his place. This wasn't governance, it was a takeover. The nobles, led by men like Count Ditlev Reventlow, didn't just want power, they wanted permanence, a system where no king could ever challenge them again. Christian's madness was their perfect excuse, and his compulsion, masturbation, the solitary vice that haunted 18th century Europe, became the court's ultimate weapon. They didn't need to lock him in a dungeon. They locked him in his own shame. Doctors, paid by the nobles, declared him insane, citing his habits as proof of a diseased mind. These weren't diagnoses, they were verdicts, designed to justify his isolation. Christian was confined to his quarters, watched by guards who reported every move. His chambers, once a sanctuary, became a prison, filled with the echoes of sermons and warnings about divine judgment. Every night he'd pace, muttering, his hands trembling, seeking release in the only act that still felt like his own. But even that was stolen, turned into evidence of his unfitness. The court's genius was in their narrative. They didn't just control Christian, they controlled how Denmark saw him. They spread stories of a king lost to madness, a man who'd betrayed his divine mandate. Pamphlets circulated, not just in Copenhagen but across Europe, describing Christian's depravity in veiled terms. They painted him as a cautionary tale, a monarch undone by his own weakness. This wasn't just propaganda, it was psychological warfare, ensuring no one would rally to his side. Even his son, Crown Prince Frederick, was kept from him, raised by Juliane Marie to view his father as a disgrace. The boy, barely a toddler, was groomed to be the next puppet, a king who had never questioned the nobles' rule. But Christian wasn't as gone as they wanted you to believe. Fragments of his mind fought back. His letters from this period, though scattered and frantic, show moments of clarity, pleas for Caroline, apologies to Struensee, even critiques of the court's corruption. He knew what they'd done, knew they'd used his own body against him. In one letter, smuggled to a loyal friend, he wrote, "They make me a monster to keep me in chains." These words were buried, hidden in archives, because they revealed too much. Christian wasn't just a victim of his urges. He was a victim of a system that turned his humanity into a crime. The court's control extended beyond Christian's body to Denmark itself. Struensee's reforms, freedom for serfs, justice for the poor, were undone within months. The nobles restored their privileges, reinstating serfdom and censorship. The church, allied with the court, preached that this was God's will, that Christian's fall was punishment for defying tradition. The people, already burdened by taxes and war, had no voice to resist. Denmark's brief glimpse of enlightenment was snuffed out, replaced by a return to feudal darkness. This wasn't just a political reversal, it was a cultural erasure, a deliberate burying of hope to protect the old order. Caroline Matilda's fate was no less brutal. Exiled to Chell, a desolate castle in Germany, she was 22, alone, and forbidden from seeing her daughter. The court spread lies that she'd plotted against Christian, that her affair with Struensee was a grab for power. Her letters, desperate and eloquent, begged for mercy, for a chance to see her child. They were ignored. She died in 1775, at 23, of a fever, or, some whispered, of a broken heart. Her story was erased from Danish history, her name a footnote in the narrative of Christian's madness. The nobles didn't just exile her, they obliterated her, ensuring no one would remember the queen who dared to love a revolutionary. Christian's life dragged on, a slow crucifixion. By the 1780s, he was a ghost, shuffled between palaces, his health crumbling under the weight of isolation and shame. His compulsion never stopped. It grew, a desperate rebellion against a world that had stolen everything else. He died in 1808 at 59, a forgotten man in a forgotten room. His son, Frederick VI, took the throne, moulded by the court to be everything Christian wasn't: obedient, traditional, a king who served the nobles' interests. The cycle was complete, a system that devoured one king to ensure the next would never resist. This is the truth they buried. Christian's story wasn't about madness or sin, it was about control. The court used shame, fear, and secrecy to break a man, not because he was weak, but because he was human. They turned his desires into a weapon, his allies into scapegoats, his kingdom into their playground. And they got away with it, because they controlled the story. History calls Christian a mad king, but madness was the lie they sold to hide their own corruption. This is the forbidden knowledge. Power doesn't need swords when it has whispers, when it can make you hate yourself. Look around you. The same forces are at work today. What parts of you are you taught to hide? What desires are you told to fear? The systems that shamed Christian, religion, medicine, politics, haven't gone away, they've just changed their masks. They tell you you're not enough, that your flaws make you unworthy, that you must conform to be free. But freedom isn't conformity, it's seeing the chains for what they are. Christian story is a warning, a mirror, a call to wake up. You're not just a man watching a video, you're a man who can choose to break free. You've come this far and there's no going back. You've seen the truth, felt its weight. The court's victory wasn't just over Christian, it was over every soul they convinced to stay silent. Don't let them win again. Go to the comments now and type "break the chains" twice. It's not just a phrase, it's a vow, a step toward owning your power. You're in the abyss with me and we're not done yet. One more layer awaits, the final truth that changes everything. You're at the bottom of the abyss now, where the truth is so sharp it cuts through centuries. Christian VII's story isn't just a forgotten chapter of history, it's a scream from the past. A warning that echoes in your bones. The court didn't just break a king, they perfected a system of control that's still alive, still chaining minds and souls today. You've seen the shame they weaponized, the allies they erased, the kingdom they stole. This final descent isn't about Christian's end, it's about the legacy of his destruction, the hidden forces that still shape your world. This is the truth they buried deepest, the one that changes you forever. You're not just a witness, you're a warrior in a battle for your own mind. This is the final revelation. Embrace it, because there's no climbing out unchanged. Christian's life after 1772 was no life at all. At 23, he was a shadow, a king reduced to a prop in a game he'd already lost. The court, led by Julianne Marie and her allies, had stripped him of everything: his will, his allies, his dignity. His compulsion, the solitary vice that had been his private rebellion, was now a public cage. The nobles didn't need to lock him in chains. They'd locked him in his own guilt, a prison forged by whispers and lies. Doctors, priests, and courtiers surrounded him, their every word a reminder that he was broken, unfit, a king only in name. His chambers became a tomb where he paced and muttered, haunted by the ghosts of Struensee and Caroline, by the life he could have had. The court's victory was total. They didn't just control Christian, they controlled the future. His son, Frederick VI, was raised in their image, taught to fear his father's madness and obey the noble's will. By the time Frederick took the throne in 1808, he was everything Christian wasn't. Dutiful, conservative, a king who served the system. The nobles had ensured their power was unbreakable, not just for one reign but for generations. Struensee's reforms, those fleeting sparks of freedom, were erased, buried under a return to serfdom and censorship. Denmark, once on the cusp of enlightenment, sank back into the dark, its people silenced, its history rewritten. But the real crime wasn't Christian's fall, it was the lie that justified it. The court didn't just destroy a man, they destroyed a truth, that power thrives on shame. They turned Christian's humanity, his desires, his doubts, into a weapon, convincing him he was the problem. This wasn't new, even in 1772. It was ancient, a tactic as old as power itself. Kings, priests, and elites have always used shame to control, to make people question their own worth. They tell you your flaws are sins, your urges are weaknesses, your questions are dangerous. And they did it to Christian with ruthless precision, turning a king into a cautionary tale, a story to scare others into submission. This is the forbidden history. Christian wasn't mad. He was human, crushed by a system that couldn't tolerate his defiance. His compulsion wasn't a disease, it was a cry for freedom, a refusal to let the court own his soul. Struensee saw it, tried to free him, and paid with his life. Caroline saw it, loved him despite it, and was exiled for it. The court didn't just win, they erased the truth, rewriting history to make Christian the villain, the weak king who failed his people. But he didn't fail. They broke him because a free king was a threat to their world. Now look at yourself. This isn't just a story from 250 years ago. It's your story. The forces that chained Christian are still here, wearing new masks but playing the same game. They are in the voices that tell you you're not enough, the systems that shame you for being human, the rules that demand you hide your truth. Religion, media, culture, they've all learned from Christian's court, perfecting the art of control through guilt. What desires do they tell you to suppress? What thoughts do they call dangerous? Every time you doubt yourself, every time you silence your own voice, you're living in their shadow, trapped in a prison you didn't build. But you're awake now. You see the chains, feel their weight. Christian's story is a mirror, showing you how they work, how they've always worked. The court didn't need swords, they had whispers, and those whispers are still in the air. They tell you to conform, to obey, to fear your own power. But power isn't in crowns or thrones, it's in you, in your refusal to bow. Christian fought in the only way he could, with his body, his will, his fleeting moments of clarity. You have more than that. You have this truth, this knowledge, this chance to break free. This is why they buried Christian's story, why they erased Struensee and Caroline, why they called it madness instead of murder. It's too dangerous, too revealing. It shows you the playbook of power, the way they use shame to silence, fear to control, lies to rewrite reality. But you've seen through it. You're not Christian, trapped in a palace of spies. You're not Caroline, exiled for loving too fiercely. You're not Struensee, executed for dreaming of a better world. You're you, and you have the power to choose right now, today, in this moment. So what will you do with it? Will you stay silent, let the whispers win? Or will you claim your truth, your strength, your right to be human? This isn't just a video. It's a call to arms, a demand that you step into your power. Christian's story shows you what's at stake, your mind, your soul, your freedom. The world hasn't changed as much as you think. The nobles are still here, in boardrooms, in pulpits, in the screens you stare at every day. They're still telling you to be less, to hide, to obey. But you don't have to listen. You've already taken the first step. You've descended into the abyss, faced the truth, felt its fire. Now it's time to act. Go to the comments one last time and type "break the chains" twice. It's not just a phrase, it's a declaration, a vow to yourself that you won't let them win. You're not just a man, you're a force, or a mind awakened, a soul unchained. Do it now and carry this truth with you. Christian's story ends here, but yours is just beginning. The world is watching. What will you do with the power you've claimed?